Everyone had already judged him, called him a liar, a thief, a man who built hope just to destroy it. The courtroom was full of whispers, eyes rolling at the little girl in the yellow jacket who said she'd defend him. But when she spoke his name, the blind dog beside her did something no one expected. He turned, slowly, without seeing, and faced the man hiding in the back row. And in that moment, for the first time, the room believed her. A cold drizzle had settled over Maple Ridge, Oregon that morning, the kind of late autumn rain that clung to windows and made the old courthouse on Alder Street feel even older. The maple trees outside had long since shed their leaves, leaving behind bare limbs and muddy sidewalks. Above, the sky was a pale gray sheet, unmoving, unfeeling. Inside courtroom 3B, the tension was as heavy as the dampness in the air. Cameras clicked softly from the back row. Reporters huddled with their notepads. The air smelled faintly of wood polish and anxiety. All eyes were fixed on the defense table. Seated there, wearing a navy blue suit that looked like it hadn't been ironed in days, was Colton Hale, 28 years old, tall and lean, with unshaven stubble clinging to a strong jawline. His dark brown hair curled slightly at the edges, overgrown from weeks in custody. There was an intelligent sadness in his green eyes, like someone who'd solved many problems for others, but was finally drowning in one of his own. Colton had been a rising star. A self-made tech entrepreneur, he founded Better Step, a non-profit app that connected at-risk youth with scholarships, internships, and free mental health resources. At 24, Forbes had dubbed him America's hopeful mind, but today the headlines read differently. Beneath the halo, the violent fall of Colton Hale. He sat in silence as his attorney rose. Monroe Green, a seasoned defense lawyer in his late 50s, with graying temples and a reputation for playing hardball, looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His frame, though sturdy, leaned slightly to the right as if carrying invisible weight. Without looking at Colton, he slowly closed his briefcase. "Your Honor," he said with a voice as cold as the rain outside, "I am withdrawing from representation. Effective immediately." A collective gasp rippled across the courtroom. Judge Harper Wells, a tall woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair pinned into a tight bun, narrowed her eyes. Known in Oregon legal circles for her stern discipline and precise judgments, she was the type who read every line of a case file, twice. Her left brow twitched, a telltale sign of irritation. "Excuse me, Mr. Green," she said, voice measured. "I cannot in good conscience continue," Green replied. "My client has not been forthcoming with me." Colton turned slowly, disbelief breaking across his face like a wave. "That's not true," he muttered, but it was too late. The courtroom was no longer his. A sea of murmurs rose behind him. Reporters began texting. Some already stood, sensing the collapse of a man once praised for lifting others. But not everyone moved. In the third row, near the end of the pew, sat a little girl no one had noticed when they entered. She was slight, with cinnamon-toned skin and long braids tied with mismatched red and green beads. Her name was Lena Morgan, and she was 9 years old. She wore a yellow raincoat over a faded blue dress, 2 sizes too big, and scuffed pink sneakers that had long since lost their shine. Next to her, resting with calm but alert posture, was a large German shepherd. Bailey was 6 years old, his fur a mix of black, sable, and aging silver along the muzzle. But what drew everyone's attention wasn't his size or breed. It was the neatly tied white blindfold covering his eyes. Bailey was blind. He had been since a rescue operation 2 years prior. And yet, somehow, he always knew where Lena was. He moved by instinct, by sound, and by something else, something unspoken. When Monroe Green walked away and Colton's chair sat empty beside him, Lena sat still. Her hands, small and slightly trembling, gripped the bench in front of her. Her lips pressed tight. Then she stood. "I can defend him," she said, her voice louder than expected. The courtroom froze. Judge Wells blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Excuse me?" "I said," Lena repeated, a little firmer now. "I can defend him." People chuckled at first. One man near the front stifled a laugh. A few phones were raised to capture the moment. A girl, maybe 3rd grade, claiming she could defend a man accused of felony assault and embezzlement? It was absurd. Except she didn't flinch. Bailey rose beside her. Though he couldn't see, he shifted slightly, turning his head toward the defense table, ears lifted, body alert, as if he sensed the weight of that moment. The bailiff stepped forward uncertainly. "What's your name, child?" Judge Wells asked. "Lena Morgan. And how old are you?" 9. Judge Wells glanced at the clerk, then back at Lena. "You understand this isn't a game?" "Yes, ma'am. I read about this case, and I know he didn't do it." Colton turned toward her, eyes narrowing in disbelief. He squinted, trying to place her face. It looked familiar, like a memory just out of reach. "And how would you know that?" the judge asked. "Because," Lena said, her voice trembling now, "he saved my grandmother's life last year. No one else remembers that. But I do." The courtroom murmurs died away. Colton's jaw tensed. Something in his eyes shifted. A memory surfaced, an old woman collapsing at a community event. He remembered calling 911, staying beside her, making sure someone came. He hadn't thought twice about it. Lena stepped forward. Bailey followed, his pace steady, his nose brushing the floor as he moved. When they reached the front, Lena looked up at the judge, then at Colton. "I know I'm not a lawyer," she said, "but if no one else is going to speak for him, then I will." The room was silent. Judge Wells studied the girl, studied the dog, studied Colton. Then, slowly, she leaned back. "Sit down on that bench," she said, nodding toward the side. Lena obeyed. Bailey curled at her feet, his ears still up, head slightly tilted toward Colton. Across the gallery, a man in a corduroy jacket, Logan Price, a freelance journalist in his late 20s, with a camera slung around his neck, had just hit record. His YouTube stream went live 30 seconds later. The caption read, "Girl with blind dog, stuns courtroom, says she'll defend tech billionaire." And just like that, everything began to change. The hallway was still wrapped in shadows when Lena Morgan opened the front door of apartment 2C. It creaked softly, the sound muted by the thick carpet of the Mapleview housing complex. Outside, the sky was just beginning to shift from black to a steel-colored blue, the cold breath of dawn sliding across the city of Maple Ridge, Oregon. It was the kind of morning where the cold slipped down your collar and lingered in your lungs. Lena stepped outside slowly, careful not to make a sound. Behind her, in the small one-bedroom apartment, her grandmother slept on the living room couch beneath a crocheted blanket, an oxygen tube tracing a line from her nose to a humming machine at her side. Dorothy Morgan, Lena's grandmother, had once been a nurse. Years of lifting bodies, standing on call, and surviving hardship had left her frame thin and her movements slow. Now, in her 70s, she had a tired heart and no real help but Lena. Her smile, when it came, was warm and worn, like a sweater passed down through generations. But it hadn't come as often lately. The bills, the medicine, and the ache in her chest made it hard to smile at all. Lena zipped up her coat, one size too big, the cuffs turned up, and slung the green backpack over her shoulder. The zipper stuck, the strap was frayed, but inside was everything that mattered. She had packed it the night before. Old articles, court clippings, her own notes written on the back of library printouts, and a drawing she'd made of Colton Hale, the man they now called a criminal, but who had once been nothing short of a hero in her eyes. There was one moment she remembered more than any other, the day her grandmother collapsed at a town fair. People had panicked, stepped back, whispered, but Colton, young, well-dressed, someone important even then, had knelt down beside Dorothy and held her hand. He stayed until the ambulance came. He even remembered Lena's name. No cameras, no speeches, just a kind man doing the right thing. She never forgot it. And then there was Bailey. The large German shepherd waited by the door, alert. His coat was a deep mix of sable and black, streaked with lighter gray along his muzzle. He wore a white cloth blindfold, tied snugly around his head, soft and secure, covering both eyes. Bailey was 6 years old and completely blind. Lena had met him 2 months after her grandmother's collapse. He had been rescued from a failed breeding facility outside town, left in a crate for days, his eyes infected beyond repair. The shelter workers said he had lashed out at first, scared and snarling at any noise. But Colton had paid for the vet bills. He'd insisted the dog wasn't broken, just hurting. He needs someone to believe in him, Colton had told the shelter staff. So they let Lena sit near Bailey's kennel. She said nothing at first, just sat cross-legged outside the bars. After a few visits, he started inching closer, until one day his head rested against her knee. He had never left her side since. And in time, Lena came to understand something strange and beautiful about Bailey. He could not see, but he seemed to sense things. When someone lied, Bailey grew still. When someone was scared, his ears perked. When someone was honest, he would gently nudge their hand. She couldn't explain it, but she believed it. Now, as she stepped into the early morning air, Bailey padded beside her, calm, steady, his steps always perfectly timed to hers. The two of them walked in rhythm, like they had practiced this moment for months. The streets were empty. Lena didn't take the bus. She wouldn't explain where she was going, not to anyone, not even to Grandma. She didn't want to scare her. She knew the risks. She was just a kid. But she also knew the truth was being buried, and if no one else was going to say something, then she would. She adjusted the weight of the backpack. In it was proof, or at least questions no one was asking. Articles that quoted unnamed sources, timelines that didn't match up. She had underlined every detail with a red pen borrowed from the library front desk. She didn't know what a cross-examination was, or how to file a motion, but she knew what was right, and she knew Colton Hale didn't deserve to be abandoned. Her breath puffed in clouds before her as the sun began to stretch over the rooftops. The courthouse was still a mile away. Bailey pressed his shoulder gently against her leg, guiding her around a frozen puddle she hadn't seen. Lena looked down at him and whispered, "You ready?" Bailey didn't need to answer. The holding cell was cold and quiet, built more for isolation than comfort. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile yellow glow over the concrete walls. The air carried that faint metallic scent of keys, cuffs, and unanswered prayers. Colton Hale sat on a metal bench, elbows on knees, fingers loosely laced. His navy suit was wrinkled, the collar askew, and a bruise from a restless night of sleep marked the side of his face. His eyes, usually sharp and guarded, were dim, as though he'd been hollowed out from the inside. For all the boardrooms and public speeches in his past, this room made him small. For the first time since the trial began, he wasn't being stared at. No cameras, no reporters, just silence. Until he heard the small bell. It was faint, like a memory. The soft jingle of a collar. Colton looked up just in time to see the courtroom door open. A deputy guided a little girl forward. Lena Morgan, 9 years old, wore her oversized yellow jacket like armor. Her backpack hung heavily from one shoulder, and her braid, tied with mismatched beads, swung as she walked. Behind her came the blind German shepherd. Bailey, wearing his now iconic white blindfold, paused for a second at the threshold, sniffed the air, and then stepped forward with complete certainty. The deputy gave Colton a wary glance. 5 minutes, he said. Judge's orders. And then it was just them. Lena didn't speak at first. She walked across the room slowly, almost ceremonially, and stopped in front of the bench. Bailey didn't hesitate. He sat down beside Colton, head tilted, then slowly lowered himself, resting his chin gently on Colton's knee. That broke him. Colton looked down at the dog, one hand twitching involuntarily before he brought it up and placed it gently on Bailey's fur. Bailey didn't move. He just breathed, steady and calm. Colton's voice came out barely audible. "He remembers me." Lena nodded. "He never forgets who's good." A beat of silence. Colton swallowed. You're the girl from the courtroom." "Yes," she said, sitting on the bench across from him. "And from the day your nonprofit saved my grandma's life." Recognition flickered in his eyes. "Town hall. She collapsed near the food table." "She did. You called the ambulance, stayed with her. You even gave me a juice box." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh, or a sob. Lena reached into her backpack, pulling out a stack of papers. "These are all the things they're ignoring. Timelines, phone records, quotes from people who didn't even meet you. I've been reading everything I could find." Colton blinked at the weight of what he was seeing. A little girl, sitting in a jail holding room, presenting case files like a lawyer. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. He met her eyes. "Why are you doing this, Lena?" She looked at Bailey before answering. Because nobody else is. Meanwhile, across town, the morning light filtered through the wide windows of a downtown cafe. Steam rose from ceramic mugs, the smell of roasted beans and paper print filling the air. In a corner, booth sat Logan Price, a 27-year-old journalist with a scruffy beard, sharp eyes behind wire-framed glasses, and a gray hoodie pulled over his head. He sipped his coffee absently, eyes locked on the screen of his laptop. The headline read, "Little Girl Declares I Will Defend Him. Courtroom Stunned by Blind Dog's Loyalty." The video had gone viral overnight. Logan had been a student in one of Colton's very first mentorship cohorts back when Better Step was still run out of a rented strip mall office. Colton had taught him not only coding and design, but something more important, how to make your work matter. Logan hadn't seen Colton in nearly 3 years. But now, seeing him in handcuffs on every news site in the country, Logan's gut told him something wasn't right. He rewound the live stream again, watching closely. Not the girl, though she was remarkable, but the moment when Bailey turned his head sharply toward one of the spectators in the courtroom. It wasn't random, it was recognition. Logan leaned back, whispering to himself. He sensed something. He opened another tab. He still had Colton's old emails archived, from the days before everything fell apart, before the warehouse incident, before the media flipped. He began searching. Back at the courthouse, Lena continued, her voice soft but intense. "They're saying you had money hidden in a safe, that you were seen near the warehouse, that you had a reason to hurt Victor Hale." Colton flinched at the name. "He was trying to steal our software," Colton said bitterly. "He lost in arbitration and blamed me. But I wasn't in St. Louis that night. I was at a conference in Seattle. My phone, I think it was cloned or something. I don't know how they got those pings." "Do you have proof?" "I don't. The security footage from the hotel was incomplete," they said. "And now the press. They don't want the truth. They want a villain." Bailey shifted slightly, leaning harder into Colton's leg. "Then we find the ones who do want the truth," Lena said. "We make them listen." "You think they'll listen to you?" "They listened to Bailey," she said with a quiet smile. "And you gave him his second chance. It's time we give you yours." Colton looked away, blinking hard. He had been called a visionary, a fraud, a genius, a thief, but never until now had anyone looked at him with simple, unwavering belief. A knock at the door signaled the end of the visit. The deputy opened it, nodding once. Colton stood slowly. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know how to—" "You don't have to," Lena said. "Just don't give up." Bailey stood and nudged Colton's hand one last time before following Lena out. Inside that dim holding cell, the air no longer felt quite as heavy. The courtroom lights felt harsher today. They hummed above the still air, amplifying every cough, every shifting chair, every whispered word like a drumbeat. Judge Harper Wells sat high on the bench, her eyes steady, her hand resting near the gavel. "All right," she said. "Miss Morgan, 1 minute, no more." Lena stood at the center of the courtroom, just below the judge's bench. She looked even smaller under the weight of so many eyes. Her yellow jacket was zipped to her chin, and in her hands she held a stack of papers, some bent, some scribbled on, all marked with the urgency of a child who had done her homework. Beside her, Bailey sat upright, ears perked beneath his white blindfold, perfectly still. Lena cleared her throat. "Thank you, Your Honor." She lifted the first page. "Everyone keeps saying that Colton Hale was in St. Louis the night Mr. Victor Hale was attacked. But when you look at the flight schedules and his last confirmed location, Seattle, it's not physically possible for him to get to the warehouse in the time they claim. It doesn't add up." The audience shifted. Some leaned forward. Others began whispering again. "The phone pings? They can be faked or cloned, and the money in the office safe." She held up another page. That office hadn't been used in 3 months. According to Better Step's own internal facility report, the key card was reassigned. Judge Wells arched an eyebrow, saying nothing yet. Lena hesitated, then continued. "And motive. They say Colton had reason to hurt Mr. Hale, but maybe someone else had more to lose. Someone from the advisory board, someone whose name kept showing up in donations. And in the lawsuit, Hale filed against Better Step before he dropped it. She looked down at her paper and spoke a name. The reaction wasn't immediate, but a second later, Bailey stirred. He let out a low, barely audible whimper, a deep, unsure sound that Lena hadn't heard from him in weeks. Then, slowly, Bailey turned his head to the left, ears high, nose twitching. He was facing the audience. Lena's heart pounded. She followed Bailey's nose with her eyes. A man in a dark coat and crisp shirt, seated 3 rows from the back, had stiffened. He had short-cropped gray hair and a thin frame, his arms crossed too tightly. He wasn't someone Lena recognized, but Bailey's reaction was clear. He sensed something. One of the court officers stationed by the wall leaned into his shoulder radio and murmured something. Another officer near the exit shifted his position and quietly exited the room. The judge narrowed her eyes. "Miss Morgan, you may return to your seat." "Yes, Your Honor." Lena gave a quick nod and stepped back. Bailey followed without hesitation, but Lena noticed his ears didn't lower. He remained alert. In the hallway just outside the courtroom, Logan Price stared at his phone. His laptop was balanced on his knees, a spreadsheet open. On the screen, dozens of tabs filled his browser, timelines and archived company records laid out like puzzle pieces. And then it popped up. A single line in a flight record, booked under a corporate travel account tied to a shell company once linked to Better Step's competitor. Passenger, T. Maddox. Departure, Maple Ridge Regional. Arrival, St. Louis Lamberts International. Date, 1 night before the warehouse attack. Logan's fingers tightened around his phone. "Got you," he whispered. He clicked save. The morning light spilled through the courthouse windows like a quiet benediction. It had rained during the night, but now the sky over Maple Ridge was clear, washed clean, as if the town itself had been holding its breath for this moment. Inside courtroom 3B, every seat was filled. The buzz of reporters and murmured speculation had given way to something rarer. Silence. Judge Harper Wells stood. Her tone was firm, but beneath it was the trace of something softer, something almost reverent. "This court," she declared, "finds sufficient cause to question the integrity of the case against Mr. Colton Hale. In light of new evidence and inconsistencies within the presented timeline and digital records, and with formal investigation now opened against Mr. Trevor Maddox." She paused, letting the name hang in the air. "I hereby order the immediate release of Mr. Hale, pending further review." Gasps filled the room. Colton sat still for a moment, as if the words hadn't quite reached him. And then he exhaled, slowly, a hand covering his mouth. The world had not been kind to him these past months. But in that moment, he looked not like a man broken, but a man finally exhaling after holding his breath underwater. 2 rows behind him, Lena Morgan sat clutching Bailey's collar. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted. She didn't cheer, she didn't move. She just leaned slightly closer to the blind dog beside her and whispered, "We did it." Bailey, 6 years old, blind, his fur tinged with age and dignity, did not bark or rise, but his tail gave a single, gentle thump against the floor. The cameras clicked, but no one spoke, and in the silence, Logan Price stepped into the aisle, holding a folder close to his chest. He approached the bailiff and handed over the documents, printed records, boarding passes, emails, and payment receipts, all connected to Trevor Maddox, a former Better Step executive. Maddox had been fired nearly 2 years prior for mismanaging grant funds. He had disappeared from the nonprofit scene, but now he was at the center of a criminal investigation. Colton turned to look at Lena. His voice cracked as he said, "Thank you." Lena smiled, but it was Bailey who moved first, rising to his feet, tail swaying gently as he pressed against Colton's leg. Colton crouched, pulling both Lena and the dog into his arms. Reporters would later describe the photo as the moment Maple Ridge found its heart again. 2 weeks later, the wind carried the scent of fresh paint and blooming gardenias through the wide-open doors of the newly renovated Better Step house. Once a fading brick building tucked between warehouses and thrift shops, it now stood proud, its windows cleaned, walls repainted in warm clay tones, and a new sign hanging above the double doors. Better Step House, for those who still believe in hope. Inside, rows of folding chairs filled the community room. There were children, some quiet, some laughing. seated next to adults from all corners of the city. Volunteers passed out lemonade and cookies, while in the front row sat Dorothy Morgan, Lena's grandmother, with her oxygen tube carefully looped behind her ears. She looked smaller than most remembered her, but there was pride in her gaze. To her left sat Detective Kendra Holt, mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with curly dark hair streaked with gray, and a kind smile rarely seen during duty. She had been assigned to the Maddox investigation and had pushed hard to verify the flight logs Logan uncovered. Kendra was the kind of woman who didn't give her trust easily, but when she did, it was unwavering. "She's brave," Kendra whispered to Dorothy, nodding toward Lena. "Bravery runs in our blood," Dorothy replied, smiling through tired eyes. At the front of the room, Colton took the microphone. Dressed in a simple button-up and jeans, he looked more human than headline, his usual polish replaced by sincerity. "We built Better Step to give second chances," he said. "To the kids no one noticed. To the animals nobody wanted. But the truth is, I didn't build this. People like Lena did. People like Bailey did." He gestured to the girl sitting in the front row. "And so today," he continued, "I'm stepping back. I'll still be here, but I want our first new ambassador to come speak. Someone who taught us what it means to see beyond what's in front of you." He looked down at Lena, extended his hand. She looked startled, but before she could move, Bailey stood. He rose gently to his paws and turned toward the stage. Everyone quieted. Without command, without sound, Bailey stepped forward, one slow, deliberate step at a time. His white blindfold caught the light. His nose twitched. His gait was graceful, imperfect, but determined. And Lena followed. She placed one hand gently on his back and let him guide her. The aisle parted for them like waves. Grown men held back tears. Some didn't bother. Bailey led her to the center of the stage, then sat beside her, head tilted toward her voice. She took the microphone with both hands. "Thank you," she said, and the room leaned in. "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not famous. I just believe someone didn't deserve to be forgotten." She paused. Bailey doesn't see with his eyes, but he still knew who to trust. Sometimes, that's enough. She looked down at the dog, and I think maybe it's more than enough. Applause broke out, slow at first, then thundering. People rose to their feet, and in the middle of it, Colton stepped forward, wrapped an arm around Lena's shoulder, and rested a hand on Bailey's back. "Bailey doesn't need to see," he said, voice thick with emotion. "He just needs to feel, and that's enough to lead us all. Sometimes the clearest truths aren't seen with the eyes, but felt with the heart. Bailey couldn't see, but he still led Lena through the storm. Just like that, God often sends us quiet guides, children with courage, animals with intuition, strangers with compassion. They may not come with trumpets or miracles carved in stone, but they come in moments, in choices, in love that refuses to stay silent. Maybe you've felt overlooked. Maybe your voice felt too small. But as Lena showed us, even the smallest voice can move mountains when God walks beside it. Bailey didn't need sight to find the truth. He only needed faith. And perhaps, so do we. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us. Have you ever witnessed a moment where God showed up in an unexpected way? Type amen in the comments if you believe that no act of faith, no matter how small, is ever wasted. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us God still moves, still speaks, and still heals. And may the Lord bless and protect every single one of you who took the time to watch, listen, and believe. From Lena, from Bailey, and from all of us, thank you.